Oh, hey there, it's Miss Lovell, the world-renowned explorer. Today, we're going to be focusing on connecting words and pictures in an informational text. Now, this morning, I found this map in my backyard. And in order for me to find the missing pieces to the map, in order to find the treasure, I have to read some passages and see how the words and the pictures connect. Before we get started on that, let me give you some background information. Okay, like I said before, today we're going to be talking about how we're going to connect words and pictures together whenever reading a nonfiction text. Whenever we are looking at any story, it's important to use not only the words in the story, but also the illustration or pictures in the story to add more meaning to what we are reading. Now, whenever you are looking at a nonfiction text, there can be different types of illustrations. There can be pictures, there can be diagrams, and there can also be maps. A picture can add meaning to what you're reading and show you what exactly they're talking about. A diagram is an illustration that labels different important parts that they want you to understand. For example, in this slide, I have a picture of an eyeball, and it shows you the different parts of an eyeball. Lastly, we have maps. Maps are really, really important whenever we are reading nonfiction stories because they can show you different landmarks, different streets, roads, rivers that add details to the area as well as to the story. So, whenever we are reading our passages today, look at the illustrations that are provided. And then while you're doing that, I want you to think to yourself, in the passage, what are the words telling me? What are the illustrations telling me? How do the illustrations help me better understand what the story is about? Now that I've gone over the different types of illustrations we can see in a story, let's go back to our map and see what we have to do to find the treasure. Okay guys, so I found this map at my house, and in order for me to get the missing pieces of the map, I have to read each passage and see what the words are telling me as well as what the illustrations show me. And I have to connect the words to the pictures. So, whenever I do this, it'll show me the next piece of my missing map so I can find the treasure. So, let's get started and read passage 1. So our first passage is on a historical event about the Titanic. So let's read what the passage says, and then we can talk about the words and the illustrations that it gives us. In 1912, the Titanic was built. It was the biggest luxury ship in the world. In those days, most people traveled from Europe to America on ships. The Titanic was the biggest and most beautiful ship of them all. It was already famous when it left Southampton, England to travel to New York. It was traveling across the cold Atlantic Ocean. There were many icebergs. They said the Titanic was unsinkable. However, on the night of April 14th, 1912, it hit an iceberg and sank. Okay, now that I've read my passage, let's look at our illustration. In this passage, we have an illustration of a map. The map's title is The Titanic Voyage. In our map, we see some different continents, such as North America, where we live, South America, Africa, and Europe. In addition to this, we also see Southampton, England, which is where the Titanic left, and they also point out New York, which is where the Titanic was going. In our map, the author also included the route that the Titanic was set on whenever it was headed to New York. And lastly, another great thing that this map shows us is exactly where the Titanic hit the iceberg and sank. Now that we've looked at all of these great details that we got from the map, let's go back to the passage and let's find some important information that they mentioned about the Titanic that we can't really see from looking at the map. One fact that the passage includes is the date that the Titanic was built. I think that's very important, so I'm going to highlight that. It was built in 1912. Another great bit of information that the passage gives us is it tells us that back then most people traveled from Europe to America on ships. We can see this as well in our map because it shows us the route that they took. Another great piece of information that they included is that before the Titanic left, they said that this ship was unsinkable. Then it goes on to say that the night of April 14th, 1912, the Titanic hit an iceberg and sank. Now that I've found great information that was included in the passage, as well as in the illustration of a map, let's go fill out our chart on the next page. So here I have a chart that looks very similar to the chart in your Ready workbook. In this chart, I need to say what the words tell me, as well as what the map shows me. So I'm going to start with the words section. On the other page, we found lots of great details that were mentioned in the passage. We're going to go ahead and write those words down on this section. The first fact that I want to write is that the Titanic was built in 1912. Another fact I want to write is that the Titanic was unsinkable. I'm going to put this in quotation marks because we know that that's not true. And then lastly, I'm going to include that the Titanic hit an iceberg and sank. These are 4 great details from my passage, and now we're going to move on to what the map shows us. First, I want to point out that it shows us where Southampton, England is. I also want to include that it shows us where New York is located. Our map also showed us the route that the Titanic took to get to New York. And lastly, I want to include that it shows us where the Titanic sank. Great work, guys. Let's see where the next place we have to go to is on our map, and then we can begin our next passage. Wow, y'all did it. The second part of the map is here. Now I need to head to the park. Wow, great job, guys. Now I know that I have to go to the park. Let's go to the park and see if we can find the next clue. Okay, guys, let's read passage 2 so I can find the next piece of my missing map. Okay, guys, passage 2 has us reading about space shuttle launches. So let's get started. Launching a shuttle into outer space is a big job. You need a lot of power. There are 3 parts that take off the shuttle, an external tank, and the rocket boosters. First, the rocket boosters and the shuttle shoot out fuel to push off the ground, and the external tank holds all of the fuel. It is huge because so much fuel is needed. When everything is up high enough, the rocket boosters disconnect. They fall back to Earth. They can be used again. Next, the external tank disconnects. It is not used again, so it crashes into the ocean. The shuttle continues flying. It does not need extra power once the launch is completed. Okay, that was a great passage about space shuttle launching. Now, connected to our passage, we have a diagram illustration. The diagram is showing us lots of different things. First, it's showing us what the space shuttle looks like. In addition to this, it also shows us where the external tank is located, where the rocket boosters are located, and where the space shuttle is located. Through this diagram, it helps us better visualize what the space shuttle looks like. Now that we've talked about our illustration, let's go back into the text and see some important information that they mention that adds to our story and adds to our illustration. One big thing that they mentioned for me is that the rocket boosters and the shuttle shoot out fuel to push off of the ground. This is how the space shuttle is lifted off into the air. Another piece of important information that they mention is that the external tank holds all of the space shuttle's fuel. One last piece of information that they mention that I think is important is that whenever it is high enough, the rocket boosters disconnect as well as the external tank. So those both come off of the space shuttle. So in the end, just the space shuttle is in space. Now that we've talked about the passage and our diagram, let's go over to the next page and let's start filling in our chart. Now, whenever you're completing these charts, this is just a way of brainstorming, getting your ideas on the paper so you don't have to use complete sentences. So first, let's talk about what the words tell us in the story. I first want to mention that the rocket boosters and the shuttle shoot out fuel to push off of the ground. The next point I want to mention is that the external tank's job is to hold all of the fuel. Lastly, I want to mention that the rocket boosters and the external tank disconnect from the shuttle. Great job. Now let's work on the photograph and what it shows us. So on our other page, we mentioned that it shows us what the space shuttle looks like, as well as it shows us where all the different parts are. So I'm going to mention that over here. And lastly, I want to include, it shows us where the different parts are located. Great work, guys. Let's go back to the map so we can start our next passage. Fantastic job, guys. I got the third piece of my map. Now I know I need to head to the beach. Let's go. Great work, guys. By connecting the words and the illustrations in that last passage, I now found out that I have to go to the beach. Let's read our last passage so we can find that missing treasure. I only have one piece of my map left. Let's get started. All right, guys, we have to read this last passage in order to figure out where the hidden treasure is. So, this passage is called the River of Life. Let's get started. Egypt is famous for its pyramids, mummies, and big deserts. However, it is the Nile River that is really the most important part of Egypt. The country is mostly a hot, dry desert. It is difficult to live in the desert. That is why most Egyptian cities started near the Nile River. It has fresh, cool water. The river made life easier in the desert. The river brought people together to build great cities and pyramids. Many Egyptians call it the River of Life. So now that we've read our passage, let's look at our illustration. In this case, it is a map. This map is so great because it shows us so much information that was not included in the passage. The first thing it shows us is the Nile River itself. It shows us how long the river is and where it's located. In addition to this, our map also points out different cities in Egypt, such as Rosetta, Cairo, Giza, and the Valley of Kings. In addition to this, our map also points out important landmarks as well as important places. These places include the famous pyramids, the capital, which is Cairo of Egypt, as well as the royal cemetery, as well as where you can find King Tut's mask. Now that we've looked over our map, let's go back to the text and see if we can find some important facts that we want to highlight. One thing that they said that I thought was very important is that the Nile River is the most important part of Egypt. It goes on to say that it is so important because the country is mostly a hot, dry desert. In addition to this, it also points out that most of the Egyptian cities started near the Nile River. The last point that I want to highlight is that the river brought people together to build great cities and pyramids. Okay, now that we've pointed out all these great details, let's go to our chart and fill it out. Let's start with the words section of our chart. Some different things that I want to include is that the Nile River is the most important part of Egypt. In addition to this, I want to point out that Egypt is mostly desert. Another fact that they mention in the story that I want to include on my chart is that the cities started near the Nile River. And last but not least, I want to include that the river brought people together. Great work. Now that we've done the word section, let's move on to what the map showed us. We had lots of things that the map showed us, so let's write all that good information down. One thing that the map showed us is where the Nile River is located. In addition to this, it points out important cities that's on the map. These places included Rosetta, Cairo, Giza, and the Valley of Kings. The last thing I want to write down is that our map points out different landmarks. These landmarks included pyramids, the Capitol, the Royal Cemetery, and where you can find King Tut's mask. Great work, guys. Y'all did so great with all of these passages. Let's go see where our map leads us next.
Guys, we found the last piece of the map. Let's go to Gulfport High School so we can find that treasure.
Wow, y'all have done a fantastic job. Now I know that my last place to go is to the Gulfport High School. Let's go now and see if I can find the treasure.
Guys, we found it. We found the treasure. Thank you for all of your help today. I know that connecting words and pictures was a difficult task, but y'all were up for it. Let's see what's inside the treasure box. Thanks again. I'll see you next time.